Well, we're talking with Nanaimo Mayor Bill McKay. As you're aware, our website is business focused, pro-business. So how would you describe Nanaimo as a business-friendly community compared to others in the province?
Well, I think Nanaimo's come a long way in the past 10 years, and we've got a long way to go. We can learn from others, and I guess probably one of the best stories that I could tell relative to being business-friendly was the introduction of Tilray to the community. When we asked Tilray recently why they chose Nanaimo because of the reception they got from City Hall, from our Economic Development Office, and from the fact that they've got a lot of good skilled workers that they've actually employed in Nanaimo. So when they decided they were going to do an expansion of their plant, they didn't give it a second thought about expanding in Nanaimo. Great story.
And an ongoing story.
Yes.
The whole Duke Point Industrial Project park area is phenomenal. What kind of there's a sawmill expansion happening there. What kind of work is going on there?
Well, there's Western Forest Products have suggested that they're going to spend, from what I understand, in the order of about $80 million at that plant down there, and they're going to amalgamate some of their capacity from the downtown plant that they had previously. There's also an active project with Western Forest Products concerning, Timber West, with Timber West on a pellet plant, and they're doing the due diligence on that right now. That's a $60 million project.
And then these are kind of not exactly minimum wage jobs.
No, absolutely not. They're great jobs. The other one that's in the works right now is the relocation of the Ro-Ro activity that's currently being done down at the Wellcox Yard in downtown by C-SPAN Ferries. They're going to be moving out to Duke Point onto one of their two properties, and I don't think they've made a decision at this particular point, but it's a 28 acre site that they're going to be building this intermodal facility on.
Certainly adding to the transportation hub understanding that Nanaimo has.
One of the challenges Duke Point does have, however, that C-SPAN's facing is there's no rail out there. So we're probably going to have a conversation with the province and perhaps the federal government in the future, particularly if we're going to be moving more rail traffic on Vancouver Island, to how they can access Duke Point.
You, in an earlier interview, I remember talking to you, and you mentioned green tape as an alternative to red tape.
Yes.
And essentially that means streamlining the process for business. Now, is this a personal goal?
Absolutely. I've been involved in the Development Process Review Committee that Mayor John Rattan put together about 5 years ago. I think that committee may have run its course now, and because there's a bigger picture that needs to be looked at, and that is everything from business licensing to zoning to parking requirements to development requirements based on the BC Building Code, our own rules and regulations. That's the biggest area that I think we can make some significant improvements in how we conduct business and make things quicker and more streamlined.
Making Nanaimo more attractive to small business.
Absolutely.
Or any business.
Absolutely. It's interesting, I received a piece of information from the mayor of Chilliwack, and there was an interesting project that had been put forward by the commercial development sector in the Lower Mainland. And they put out a request to build a 50,000 square foot office/warehouse building to 20 different communities. And they wanted to see, number one, how long they would expect the process to take to go through a rezoning and get to the building permit stage, and what the fees would be. And it was interesting because across Vancouver the fees went everywhere from about $150,000 to over $800,000. And the time allowed for getting to the building permit stage were anywhere from 4 months to 18 months. So that gives you an idea of how varied communities are. We want to be in that short end of the time frame.
What would be the ideal business you would like to attract in Nanaimo?
Well, anything in manufacturing that we can use the skills, anything that deals with transportation, But one of the areas that I believe that Nanaimo is absolutely primed for is solid waste management. And that includes having Nanaimo as the hub for accepting and remanufacturing and resource recovery. That's a huge new sector that we haven't even scratched the surface on exploring.
Green industries.
Absolutely, absolutely. And resource recovery. There's a company called MBA Polymers that have discovered how to deal with plastics, for example. And they are able to harvest, with their technology, up to 21 different styles of plastic. And after it comes out of the factory, waste goes in, as we would believe it to be, and out the other end comes product ready to be used for remanufacturing.
Fiber, really.
Well, it's fiber, but they're actually little pellets, and they've got 4 factories in Europe, because Europe's so much further ahead than North America when it comes to resource recovery. But I'd like to really have a serious conversation with this company, whose head office is in Washington, actually, about Nanaimo being a BC central location for such a plant.
Now, Nanaimo's origins were resource-based industries.
Correct.
Now, there still is a future, and an expanding future, for resources. I mean, this is Vancouver Island, this is British Columbia.
Yes.
So how do you feel the resource industries are faring?
Well, if we look at forestry, for an example, if you listen to the senior management teams at Timber West, for example, they'll tell you that they have hundreds of jobs that are actually, they call them lunch bucket jobs, where you can go logging during the day and you can go home at night, which very few people even know about through some of the managed forest licenses that they've got. There are a lot more jobs out there than you would ever imagine.
How important do you imagine that value-added forestry is?
Well, it all depends on on what level of value added you want to go to. There may be the possibility that we don't have the ability to produce economically a 2x4. However, we might be able to go to, for example, the Swedish model that says that whoever has the timber license actually produces a product out the other end. And when I say a product, I'm talking something more sophisticated than a 2x4, perhaps a pre-manufactured home, such as the Swedish model. And that's huge value added. And I know that we've got the skills and the labor, the willing labor here in Central Vancouver Island to do that.
Well, the forestry infrastructure is in place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You're talking about transportation. How important is transportation to the business community?
Oh my goodness! For everything from getting people back and forth across to the mainland, as well as to points beyond, it's a huge factor in decisions relative to people moving here and businesses locating here. We've got a couple of areas right now that are restricting us from our potential, and that basically boils down to all-weather capacity. I believe that we would have a much greater chance if we were to have, for example, Helijet, who are coming in January. They can offer a level of service that, for example, our float planes and even our airport can't offer. The high-speed passenger ferry for movement of people back and forth without their cars is going to be a huge boon to Nanaimo.
Commuters.
Commuters for one, but also they give the people from Nanaimo and Central Vancouver Island the ability to move back and forth, is in addition to which they provide additional capacity for tourism from Vancouver to Nanaimo for all portions of Vancouver Island, not just Nanaimo.
That brings us to the rail. You were mentioning rail. That's an ongoing issue, the Nanaimo-Esquimalt Railroad. Can you envision a time when there could be, say, light rail service connecting different island communities, which would, of course, open up tourism in other areas?
Myself and a couple of our councillors about 8 months ago went on a tour of the rail, so that Southern Rail could actually explain to us what they were going to do with the $20 million that the regional districts have come up with for funding to get a baseline of track repairs up and running. And what they explained to us was they are going to they're going to take those capital costs and use them for R&M to bring things up to a standard where they can have most of the rail on Vancouver Island back up to a standard that we can actually have passenger traffic on. Then they explain that once that foundation is laid, they can then develop a number of small business plans. Best example I could give you would be in the West Shore of Victoria, into Victoria. There's a great business plan. From Nanaimo to Port Alberni with container and rail traffic could be another huge boon to Nanaimo.
Of course, as a tourist attraction too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Once they get that going, we've got a lot of capacity on our rail. But the other thing that we need to consider is, can we take a look at the fact that in Nanaimo, could we have light rail between Courtenay and Lantzville, for example, or Courtenay and Nanaimo, Courtenay and Ladysmith, or Courtenay and Duncan, as almost a commuter style rail? I know that myself, if I was going to spend a day up in Courtenay, I wouldn't have any issue with hopping on a train and going up to Courtenay for the day.
I spoke with Mike Hooper, the airport manager, and he is quite enthusiastic about the idea, and he suggested, wouldn't it be great if there was a train station at the airport?
Oh, absolutely. But before we do that, how about we get some buses out there?
Well, that's right. Well, he said the airport could be a real nexus for transportation in general.
Yes.
Let's put our crystal ball on the table. 5 years from now,
Yes.
2020, what will Nanaimo look like from a business perspective or any perspective?
Well, I think it's going to be a work in progress. Myself, I would like to see us start building a community that is built for people from 1 to 101. And that is, we need to consider that families with children, they need services. They need parks. They need good transportation options. We also have to consider our business community, how we develop our business. We have to concern ourselves with how we develop our neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are going to be, they're going to be the nucleus of the city, if you will. And
your personal identity.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we need to consider how we're going to support neighborhoods and how the city builds around those neighborhoods, from a transportation, including pedestrian and cycle functions, or the ability to be able to move around in something other than a single occupant vehicle.
So again, keeping our eyes towards that environmental footprint.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That would require, I imagine, a lot of input from the community. So how receptive is the city to the public?
Well, one of the things that we're going to be looking at is to have different ways for the community to be able to interact with the city. I'm not a big fan of the model we have right now, where we develop plans and then tell the community afterwards. I would rather start with a blank sheet of paper and say, here's our challenge. Let's have a sit-down conversation. It could be at the Shaw Auditorium in a theater-style audience. It could be at a high school gym. It could be in a meeting room at the conference center, where we actually get people interactively involved. The ones that the processes that I've seen where we've used that have been highly successful to get input from the community. The question is, how do we get more people involved in the conversation?
And that's motivating the public somehow.
Absolutely.
Is there any final wrap-up you'd like to say? Is there any kind of message you'd like to get out?
I'm really, really proud of this community, of Nanaimo, and how we look after one another, how we volunteer, how we're concerned for each other, and how we want to listen to each other's voices. I think that it's a very engaged community. This last election campaign certainly showed that, and I'd like to carry on that level of excitement and engagement in Nanaimo for years to come.
Well, it was encouraging to see the voter turnout was much higher.
Yes, about 30% higher than the previous time.
And that's got to be a positive thing.
Absolutely. This community is highly engaged.